And we are live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this wonderful, hopefully, Friday afternoon for some people. I think some people, maybe they're in Europe. I know it's always an interesting mix. Thanks so much, Joseph, for joining me. How's your day going?
It's going great so far. Well, I'm on leave now, so I'm on
Oh,
parental
nice.
leave. So
Oh,
yeah,
nice. Oh, man.
and yeah, Friday afternoon. I hope no one's deploying right now, so that'll be interesting if something
Yes.
happens over the weekend. But yeah,
Yes.
thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, and we'll dive into DuckDB here in a second for anyone here who's here to hear about that. No, I honestly want to talk to you about that because to me, I've been seeing tons of tweets about it. I think it's mostly tweets. I don't know if LinkedIn data LinkedIn is as switched on about it just yet, but
Mhm.
it seems to be very, very big in the Twitter space. So I was like, I really want to ask, like, what's going on? What's going on with DuckDB? Before doing that, like, love to get a quick background. Like, kind of what's your background in data?
Yeah. My name is Joseph Machado. I work as a senior data engineer over at LinkedIn currently. I started off as a data scientist and kind of figured I prefer building infrastructure than just models and making presentations. So I moved over to the engineering side. Started off with Python, just automating it with cron or Windows scheduler, and then moved on to Airflow, and then got into like real-time streaming stuff as well. Right now, most of the work I do is within LinkedIn's proprietary infrastructure, but it's mostly in Spark. That's the TLDR of what I do. I also write articles on my blog, startdataengineering.com. That's how I think you noticed me, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah. I mean, like, if anyone who ever bugs me about putting together a data engineering project video series, Joseph has a few, both videos and written, start to finish. So he's got multiple options that actually are complete. So,
My
uh,
videos aren't as good as yours. I've stopped making them. I don't have the time. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, your articles are great, and they definitely go, like, I think the whole way. So that's I think it's very unique in the data engineering space. So no, and I appreciate it. I think I started finding them before I found your videos, but yeah, I really appreciate those
Thank you.
articles.
Good.
Yeah, well, I think we can just jump into the question
Hmm.
of the hour. Just because, again, to me, it's like, okay, I'm seeing DuckDB. I'm seeing everyone kind of.
Yeah.
Some people are poking fun at it, like, oh, look at all the VCs following DuckDB. It's the new hot
Yeah.
thing. I think I heard recently that there's tons of people already, like, willing to put, I don't remember how many millions of dollars into
Wow.
Mother
Really.
Duck, right? Well, you get enough
Uh,
interest, right?
that's it's kind of interesting that people just jump on it without actually like going through the details. But
Yeah. So let's go, like,
yeah.
let's go through it. Like, what is DuckDB? I guess from like a high level.
Right. So on their website, it says it's a in-process OLAP database management system. So like it's similar to any analytical database, but the difference is that you don't need like to install and run a server. So for example, if you consider Postgres or Redshift, you're running something, it's constantly on. Although there are serverless options, you still have to set it up, you know, set up permissions and things like that. But DuckDB is in process. What that means is you can run it as a CLI if you want to, or
Mm,
even as like a Python library. So you're not really managing the side of things, you're just using it. So that's what makes it super easy to use. I mean, it comes with its downsides as well, but making it's almost like you can think of it as like a Pythonic way or Python based process that kind of does what a DB does. So for example, if you're like doing large scale aggregates, Python and pandas might not be as optimal as using DuckDB. So you
mm,
can just like write like your analytical query on DuckDB, and you have it. You don't have to install any database. You don't have to kind of manage users, permission, create users, insert data, and all those sort of things. You can just directly read from a file without
mm,
having to specify the schema. So I mean, that's like the core of it, and I think why it's becoming popular is like people are either tired of all these OLAP databases being SaaS vendor driven, and they want something that they could play around with and they could use in production.
mm-hmm,
And DuckDB has feature parity with almost all the analytical kind of functions that we need. So recently I was going through multiple databases like DuckDB, Trino, and kind of trying to figure out which database has like the most features, and DuckDB is up there with a lot of the big data tools like Trino and Hive and things like that.
Yeah. Like I guess one maybe close thing, is it similar to like a SQLite but for the analytical side, or?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. It's SQLite for the analytical side. It's more for, as you said, like large scale data processing, but it also like has a lot of these analytical properties. Like you don't have to fit the entire data into memory. You can read partition files. You can use wildcards, and they even like came up with their own kind of tweaks to SQL. For example, they have like select star exclude column names, which will
Oh, okay.
select all the columns and except the excluded column. So they are building up on like the standard SQL format. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually kind of nice because yeah, occasionally it's like I want everything except this one column, but I don't want to have to write out every column except for this one column. So that is nice. How would you say it kind of does compare to like other data warehouses out there, whether it be SaaS, not SaaS?
I think feature-wise, it's pretty up there, but the problem is like you can't run it as a central warehouse. So like for example, if you have Snowflake, you run it, you connect all your systems to it, and it just works. But DuckDB is not meant for that. It's meant like as an in-process processing system. So one way you could think of it is like instead of doing all your transformations in like Snowflake or BigQuery where you pay by scan, you could spin up your own instance with DuckDB, process it there, and dump it in a warehouse for it to be served. Warehouse it's not just a computation, right? It also provides a lot of like users and roles and restrictions. So those sort of things comes into play when you're building like a data warehouse that multiple people use. But when you're just transforming data, you don't really need all those features. Those actually become more work. You have to do more work to ensure that your transformations work. So in that sense, I think that's where the difference lies. Like you can just spin up DuckDB and just process it without having to think about like the foundational work, like create a user, create a table, give them permission. So if you're running it on an EC2, give permission for EC2 to hit that database and things of that nature. You're kind of taking away like the what do you call it, a part of the infrastructure, if you will, and kind of embedding the database into your or data warehouse into your process wherever it may be.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, do you think like one possible design pattern you could see with this is like, oh, I have my data in S3. I'm going to transform it using DuckDB and then maybe store it in like Snowflake or Redshift. That way, I'm not paying. Maybe it's cheaper. I don't know what the computational cost would be on wherever you're running it, but perhaps it's cheaper to run it there and then just store it, in Snowflake. Is that something you can kind of see people going towards?
I can see people going towards that if the cost becomes prohibitively expensive. So far, if you're doing this same computation over and over on Snowflake multiple times, you're gonna be running into a lot of expenses there. In those scenarios, I do see people spinning up like a storage optimized EC2 instance, running DuckDB on it, and then just dumping it into Snowflake or Redshift or wherever, and then allowing people to query from it. But the problem, there is a trade-off as well. Right now, we have to spin up an EC2 instance, but also bring data from S3. DuckDB can directly read from S3, but that you will still incur the bandwidth costs, which I'm assuming is not as high as computational cost.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the AWS service has like 10 GB, and if you go for like the optimized one, that's even higher bandwidth, so shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there anything else you'd say in terms of like why you think people are so interested in it? Like besides obviously again, SaaS vendors both being expensive and also just kind of sometimes it's just like people get tired of what currently is and they want something different. Is there any other reasons you think that?
Yeah, I think the main reason, and I'm seeing this in a lot of tools as well, is developer ergonomics and usability. So let's say you want to test with ClickHouse, right? It is easy enough to set up, but it's still not as easy as DuckDB. If you want to try it out locally, you can easily spin it up. But then if you want to deploy it, now you have to kind of worry about like networking and setting up the configs. Same with Trino, right? Like it's relatively easy to run it locally, but then if you're deploying it, you need to kind of worry about the configs and things like that. Whereas if you're doing just DuckDB, you don't need to worry about kind of those things. You just download it, process it, that's it.
Yeah.
All you need is the raw data. And with, I mean, storage being cheap, people tend to put all their data in like S3 or Google Cloud Bucket or something like that and just process it. Yeah, that's where I think people are leaning towards. And I think companies are also realizing like the harder it is to develop a data pipeline, the worse it is. If you make a mistake, you have to like start from scratch. Whereas if your development pipeline is simpler, people tend to be releasing features more often and correcting your issues easier than if not. Yeah. So I mean, it's not just with DuckDB. I'm seeing the same with like Airflow to Daxter. Things were much more complex. Now things are getting a little less complex, hopefully.
Yeah. Nilesh put out, do you think it'll be a distributed DuckDB?
I don't know. So it's kind of interesting because like I was looking at one specific feature in DuckDB. It's basically like filter push down on partitions. So if you have multiple partitions and you filter by that, DuckDB will just read that one partition, one folder, right? They don't have that yet as of like 5-6 days ago. There's an open issue. And they were specifically saying like, oh, this is like not distributed yet. So I'm not sure if it will be distributed anytime soon. I don't see it happening unless they get like tons of funding and they're supposed to make it distributed. And I envision something like, oh, you can run it locally, but then you can deploy to us and we will be distributed.
Yeah.
But I think it's at least 1 or 2 years away, if ever. Oh, Nilesh, hi. I just noticed the name.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say, I was like, oh yeah. What was it? I think it's interesting because like, you know, one of the things that people like about it, or at least I think is currently attracting people to it, is it's, again, lightweight, kind of free-ish. So if they do go SaaS, which is how they'd probably have to go to make money, it's like, now do you just become one of the other companies that is just, you know, trying to make money off it? And there's nothing wrong, obviously. You should make money off your product, but if that is the interest, it'd be interesting to see how they then convince people to actually pay for this product. So.
Right. I mean, I think I love SaaS. It's like makes our life so much easier, you know, without having to worry about all the infrastructure and networking stuff. But what annoys me is like when you try it locally, some of these SaaS vendors make it really difficult to kind of test it locally. So for example, Redshift or Snowflake, you have to spin up another instance and connect to it. And then you run into problems like, okay, how about fixtures? How about multiple developers accessing the same data warehouse? It's just a whole kind of mess. And that's why DBD is so good, right? You can test locally without having to manage all the testing infrastructure. So I think the easier it is to test locally and kind of quickly iterate and play around with it, the better off it will be. The pipeline will be.
Yeah. I don't know if this actually, this question, is DuckDB containerized? I guess I'm curious because like it sounds like it's more like a library, not something that you containerize. But I'd like to hear your perspective.
Yeah, it's just you can think of it as a CLI tool.
Yeah.
In some sense, so you can containerize it in the Docker container, but it's in C, so I don't think you need to. It works pretty well on most systems. You just download shell file and then you just run it. That's pretty much it. And I think if you install like pip via pip or Julia or other languages, it automatically installs the script for you. So yeah.
We kind of again touched on this earlier, but like where do you kind of see DuckDB maybe fitting in like the larger architecture or data world in the future?
I have two kind of hypotheses. I mean, obviously, I'm not like a pro future predictor, but my hypothesis is it will fit a lot in the transformation side of things because people are realizing you don't really need like large and distributed system for most of the computations they do. If it's like a few gigabytes, you don't need Snowflake. You could just work around with what you have, right?
Mm.
And recently they also announced that DuckDB could read data directly from Postgres and do your analytics on there. So companies starting out doing more analytics and pushing dashboards and such, they don't really have to spin up a Snowflake or Redshift. They could just use DuckDB to get data from Postgres, do your analytical stuff, and push it out to reports or whatever. So that's one place I see it. The other place is, I mean, I also mentioned it's with the transformation layer. I think DuckDB could be helpful there. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is like I think people are realizing that things are getting super complex, and they want to like consolidate things. It's the same thing, right? Start with monolith, go to microservices, come back to monolith. So I think people are coming back from microservices, and there will be a section of companies doing things in a few nodes instead of like a huge cluster of nodes, because you don't really need like a large distributed system unless you are at that scale.
Yeah.
So for small companies, maybe a few hundred GBs, you can easily do that on a stored, optimized, easy to instance, and it's not even it's not that expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I do feel like there's a similar kind of thing going on in the like, not just on the technical software engineering side, but on the data side, where it's like, oh, we need unbundled, bundled, etc.
Yeah.
It feels like this has been the year. I'm both talking to more VCs who keep asking about like certain bundled solutions like that are kind of newer. They're like, oh, where's this going? Whereas last year it seemed like it was all about like piecemealed solutions.
Right.
So yeah. Going back to DuckDB, I missed this question earlier, but what's the ideal file size basically should use DuckDB for? And when do you kind of prefer it over Pandas or Spark? If you've thought about that.
Yeah. Yes, I have. So ideal file size, right? Again, it depends. Like it's the same thing with distributed system. If your file is like a single large file, it's gonna take a long time for DuckDB to read through it. But having said that, your file could be large, and you don't need it to fit in memory for DuckDB to do its processing. It can work with out of memory files as well. I think this question might be asking specifically about partition size.
Maybe.
If you're wondering about specific partition size, I would say like similar things with like 250 MB or 150 to 250 generally. But having said that, I haven't kind of experimented with that specific kind of ask. So yeah, I would just try it out and just open a GitHub issue. They're pretty responsive. Like all their issues have been closing quite quickly. So I think you should ask that. I'm not sure about that. When to prefer it over Pandas and Spark? So I would prefer it over Pandas partially because I am more inclined towards SQL processing than processing in Pandas, just because it translates to multiple databases, and I feel like SQL gives me more power over manipulations than Pandas. But if you're asking in terms of like memory and efficiency, I would prefer DuckDB over Pandas just because it's written in C, although Pandas internally, it uses some C++, I think. You still have to kind of chunk through files sometimes in Pandas. Like, for example, if you're reading a large CSV, you have to tell Pandas, like, chunk through it or stuff like that. Sometimes it'll go out of memory, whereas DuckDB, you don't need to worry about optimizing that. As for Spark, again, similar thing. If you're running Spark on, like, terabytes or like more than hundreds of GBs, and your local machine can fit it, I'd go with Spark. And obviously there is a machine learning side of things. If you want something more complex than SQL, yeah, definitely Spark. If not, and if permissible, just use DuckDB. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
The good thing about it is you can just load it, install it locally. It's not that difficult. I know Spark sometimes it's a little bit tricky to install locally and play around with, but DuckDB, I would just install it locally and play around with it to see if it works for a use case. Yeah, that's my answer to that.
Yeah. That makes sense. It reminds me of like, so I don't think I understood this tweet when I saw it the first time, which was like, how else would you look at like 100,000 row CSV or like 1 million? After I was like, what is this question asking? And I think it was like 4 weeks ago. It just never clicked. And then I was like, oh, they're making fun of, or at least poking at DuckDB. It's like, how else are you going to do it? At least I think that's where that was going. data Twitter is hard to keep up with. One week it's DuckDB, the next week it's data contracts, the next week it's like I'm just like, what's going on? I don't know.
Yeah, this is what I do. I try not to listen to Twitter is a lot. Like it's like a flood of information. So yeah, I try not to look at that as much as I can.
Yeah.
Only so there's like a filter you can use. You'll only see the people you follow tweets, and I try to keep the people I follow to a minimum.
Yeah.
So
that's a good move. I'm working on that. I created Seattle Data Guy forever ago, and back then I created like a bot that did like follow to follow.
Oh.
So now I've got to like unfollow a ton of people. I'm like, I don't care if
Wow.
you unfollow me later. I have 9,000 people I'm following, and I don't know who 9,000 of them are.
I have like 20 or something. I'm also like not like super active.
Yeah, you're more active on LinkedIn, and that's where I saw the post on DuckDB, and I think that's when I was like, okay, now that DuckDB is like more
to
on
LinkedIn.
now I think it's worth digging into more. Data Twitter's like initial, like that's like the early adopter kind of thing. Once things switch over to
that's an interesting separation. I never really thought about it, but it does make sense. Data Twitter has a lot more variety, whereas in LinkedIn, it's more like standard stuff. Interesting.
I feel like it's more standard, and I feel like it's not as like I only look at like 2 or 3 posts at LinkedIn at like anytime I like log in, whereas like Twitter, I feel like I'll scroll through a lot. Like you'll just kind of scroll through, and it just you look at a lot more stuff. When are we going to have Swan DB?
I don't know. There's like timescale DB. Is there like a Tiger DB or something? Like I see so many DBs these days. It's kind of insane. But one thing I do notice is like, at least in the past couple of years, the tools that are becoming popular are the ones that make it easy for developers. So DBT easy for developers, DuckDB easy for developers. DAX, they're a little bit more easier than Airflow, not as smooth as I would like, but yeah. My prediction is like, I mean, again, they could do the huge rock of salt, but my prediction is like, I think at one point in time, it'll be like the application and data scheduling service will be running in the same node or cluster of nodes, so like ECS or EKS or something like that. Because I think like the separation of like, oh, our data pipelines is in this repository and our application is in another repository, especially for like early stage startups, makes things much more complex than it needs to be. But we'll see. I'm also like biased towards more simple solutions, so I might be biased here.
Yeah, I think we're all hoping for more simple solutions and just more kind of a consolidation, but in a way that like. Yeah, I'm trying to think, because the hard part sometimes isn't always the tools, right? Like to me, it is that like transformish layer, at least from the data side, right? Like it is the business logic that you're applying to it. I think often is where the complexity comes in. Thoughts on 5? Do you have any thoughts on this? Thoughts on 5 stopping SQL transformations, DBT transformations?
I can't tell. Yeah. I mean, people like to kind of dunk on Fivetran quite a bit. I think it's a great tool, to be honest. I mean, yeah, it doesn't have a lot of your kind of standard software practice like you can do CI/CD. There are some connectors that are not available. But I think like for the most part, writing a CDC pipeline, especially with like that captures, deletes, and changing data schemas, is not simple. It's pretty complex. Like it's a lot of engineering work. So I do think Fivetran it'll still go strong, but stopping SQL transformation to I don't know. I do prefer DBT transformation. So
I think this is, I don't know how recent this was. I only saw it like yesterday in a tweet that like someone's like, oh no, basic SQL transformations are being stopped. They're kind of the same, kind of different.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Do people use that much Fivetran SQL transformation as much as DBT? I'm not sure. Like,
oh well, I'd be curious. I'm sure they know the difference, which I'm not sure what it is. I think they said it's going to stop in April 2023. So there's some time, but it shouldn't be too hard to switch in theory. I think, the only funny thing there is that, because I just saw a tweet from the CEO, George, where cause someone asked like, oh, now do you have to pay for DBT? He's like, no, DBT is free. So in a funny way, they're also stealing from DBT Cloud. Right? Like, it's like, oh, well, you're technically taking money from DBT by using DBT and hosting it yourself. So, well, we'll see where that goes. That's a different side of the data world, the finance side, the actual making money. Okay, I don't know if we want to do Q&A. We can do some Q&A here in a second. But before that, where do you kind of see the data engineering world going, I guess, in the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm. I think there will be like two kind of organizations. One will be a little bit on the smaller side, number of engineers speaking. So it'll be like maybe 50 to 100 engineers. Those sort of teams, I think, will move towards a more consolidated repository. So instead of having multiple application and data pipeline services separate, I think it'll come together, just maybe one service or two services that just takes care of, like, you have the application layer and the kind of data transformation layer as well. And I think like backend engineering and data engineering will kind of combine together, because I think they're kind of very similar. It doesn't make sense to separate it out, especially with like, you need to know the data to actually be able to transform it. You don't need a separate data engineer who only works on kind of managing that transformation. There might be like data platform engineers, but I think data engineer and backend engineer will kind of combine together. But in the bigger companies, it will be still deep specializations, because there are so many teams, you can't just have everyone in one team. So that will be like microservices, data contracts, maybe. I don't know. We'll see about that. But I think that's how it's gonna evolve. And I think like smaller companies having simpler teams will lead to quicker feature development, or like data development, if you will. And I think that's some place where DuckDB can really help. And I think a lot of people are trying to get into data engineering, so that should be interesting. We'll see how it changes the employment landscape.
I think for now it's fine. I don't know. There's never enough
engineers. That's true.
For now, I don't know.
For now, what about you? Where do you see?
I mean, I guess it's a very broad question. So, I think in the next 5 years, I'm hoping we'll see something similar to what like Salesforce and Snowflake are kind of talking about, where it's like you're simplifying the like actual ingestion, where it's like maybe it is just as easy as sharing data. Mostly because that gets rid of a lot of SFTP that gets pushed around, right? Like, right? Like I worked at Facebook and I probably had like 4 or 5 SFTP pipelines that were going in both directions, right? Like you're pulling from someone, you're giving someone else, and it's like, oh gosh, are we still doing SFTP? It's like, okay, fine. So it just duplicates so much data, and like to me, it's also like the idea of like having that like also like condenses the amount of data that's being used, and then you don't have as much space in servers, and then it's just a lot of time save. I don't know if it's where it's going to go, but it's where I'd like things to go. Is there any term kind of currently being used in the data space that you kind of wish didn't exist?
I don't want to say anything.
All right, if you don't want to say anything.
I mean, I'd say like just ignore the noise and kind of think about the fundamentals and core practices. Look at it as software engineering, and whenever we see something on Twitter or LinkedIn, always think about the trade-offs and the kind of like the context, because some people say are proponents of certain approaches, but it also depends on how the company works and how the teams works and things like that. So just be aware of that. That's what I would say, even to myself, because sometimes I get caught up in it and I'm like, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense.
It's really hard, right? Like in the data space, because it feels like every month someone's talking about something. Well, literally, it feels like every month someone's talking about something else, and you're like, what? There's a new thing I now have to go deep dive into. Honestly, most of the time, like I said, I try to ignore it until like I'm like, okay, now it seems like a valid idea.
That's what I did with DuckDB as well. I've been seeing it for a while, and I'm like, okay, what is this? Finally, saw it, and it was like, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
I'll add to the kind of complexity that of Twitter noise and LinkedIn noise. I think there's like this. I don't know if you heard of it. There's a language called Elixir.
no, actually, no, I haven't.
So they are basically like it's like Scala Akka service, but built into the language runtime.
Okay.
They are making a lot of progress on data pipelines as well.
Mm,
So what's different about that language is that it comes with like um, servers that can monitor pipelines
mm,
and kind of restart it if it fails. So basically, like what Airflow does, but it does it at the language level.
okay.
So there are some people talking about that as well. In case you want to check it out, it's like Elixir Gen servers. They kind of manage it for you.
Okay. I'll
So
have to. Great. Something else I have to dig into.
something else you have to do.
All right. Someone on data Twitter, go dig into it for me, and then if do a deep dive, then I'll get back to you. Speaking of the basics, so
Mhm.
someone asked, for a data engineering profile, are we supposed to learn all the data structures in Python, or only data visualization Python is enough?
So when you say data engineering profile, I'm assuming it's for the interviews, right? If it, let's talk about the interviews and then we can go about the kind of real. If you talk about the interviews, you don't need to learn all. Like I have never run into like a try or tree question, not tree, try TRIE question, or some complex backtracking algorithm or dynamic programming when it comes to like interview question. It's mostly like lists, linked lists, some kind of dictionary, and then trees.
Yeah.
Specifically, breadth first search, depth first search, sort of like island type problems. So those are the things you typically need to know to crack the engineering interview. But when you think about like the real kind of data structure used in like data engineering, I would look into like indexes. What are the different types of indexes, like B index, all those sort of things. I'll also look into like partitionings in OLAP DBs, and also like look into like column encoding, like Parquet, Iceberg, and there's like some interesting stuff going on there, and also like how OLAP DBs work.
Yeah.
So hope that answers it. Data visualization in Python is enough. It depends on the position, but more often than not, you would not be doing data visualization in Python as a data engineer. These days, typically visualization is done in like a BI tool. So you will serve up the data, and then sometimes you will have to write like lookml, which is like SQL, but for looker. So you'll be working with more of a BI tool more often than Python for pure visualization.
Yeah, when I first started in the data field, well, before I even started, I was in college. I learned about D3.js,
Oh wow!
and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is gonna be the coolest thing ever."
So,
And you realize how much effort it takes, and then you learn about Tableau, and you're like, "Wait, why didn't I just learn about this
yeah,
first?"
exactly.
Like getting like testing, everything is so much harder just
Yeah,
with the most coding languages. Like I think, like you said, like if you're a data scientist, you might be doing like some charts,
maybe.
in like
Python.
whatever a Python, what's MATLAB? It's like MATLAB or something like that, but their library. But overall, if you're a data engineer, more than likely you're just kind of putting it together in a Tableau, in a Looker. Maybe
Yeah.
if you work at Facebook, there's Unidash.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's I would say Python for visualization is not as important, and I would focus more on the data structures part than you would on visualizations.
Yeah.
Um, Also, someone said, by the way, thanks Ben and Joseph for the content. So thank you so much,
Oh,
Joseph. For
Sanjay, I recognize the name.
oh,
Yeah,
do
you're
you?
welcome, Sanjay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There are some repeating audience. Kind of I note their name sometimes, and I
Yes.
remember Sanjay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. It's not easy going from non-tech to a DE.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, just for anyone out there who's still out there, let's see, there's at least almost 30 people. Feel free to ask any questions about DuckDB or I guess data engineering. If you haven't gone to Joseph's website, Start Data Engineering, it's great. You can
Yep.
definitely learn a ton there. I've definitely at least referenced it in one of my videos about like ideas for data engineering projects because it's like, yeah, there's so many here.
I'm writing another one. Kind of so the projects I have is more like it's okay, but it doesn't go through the infrastructure part as much as I would
mm,
like. Like, oh, how are we doing CI/CD? How are we doing like deploys? So I'm trying to kind of write something, but yeah, I have a baby, so it's kind of rough.
I mean, in general, anything beyond like just setting up a basic Airflow pipeline and then like maybe doing some sort of visualization, it takes so much more time than you think.
Yeah,
Every time,
exactly.
it's just like you think you're like, I'm gonna do this project this big, and you're like, why is this taking me like 30 hours to finish? It's like because it's a lot of work, and then like
It
you said,
is.
you add in a baby, you add in other things that you're doing, and suddenly you're like, oh, I do not have time for this.
Hopefully soon though. Hopefully soon.
What tools are you using in the new article?
So I have it here. I wanna, I wanted to try like use Terraform because I haven't used Terraform in any of
Okay.
my articles. So Terraform, GitHub for CI/CD, some migrations with like Alembic, or there's a yo-yo migration library. Some testing. Airflow testing is just rough, so we'll see.
Yeah.
And the Docker stuff. So
Yeah.
hopefully
So
it gets out soon.
so you don't want to try out Dagster for testing? You don't want to.
So the plan I have is to kind of show people how all these work, and then have like 3 projects that use those patterns. So one of the
Okay.
3 uses Dagster, and one is Airflow, one is Cron. So
Okay. Oh, nice. That's actually really cool. So you can kind of show like the different. Is it gonna be
yeah,
like this? Is it essentially the same project, or is it like slightly different projects?
it's similar enough
Yeah.
that you can transfer the principle, but it's different tools and
Yeah.
different input data.
Yeah. I think last time we talked, you said you'd only tested out Dagster. How about now? How are you feeling about it? Do you like it?
I do like it. I do like it a lot more than I do Airflow. I mean, I love Airflow, but it's just it's really difficult to test sometimes locally.
Yeah.
And Dagster makes it almost as easy as native Python to test. That's the reason I really like it. And it also like has some like nice features, like you can click on like a task and see see description about the task, much more detailed description about the task. You can see like if it's like a DBT task, what it actually does and things like that. Whereas in Airflow, you can't really do that. You have to click it, and then you have to go read the code. So it has some niceties like that, and it's also like more reactive, the web UI.
Yeah, that makes sense since Nick is ex Facebook. So
Yeah. Well, he's the one who did the what is that? GraphQL, right?
Yeah.
So it shows actually.
Just since this was asked, and then we'll go to the other question. But how about Prefect? Any feelings there?
I can talk a lot about Prefect because I haven't played around with it that much. Sorry,
Yeah.
Abby.
Too many tools. Too many tools.
Yeah.
More of just a high level question. Do you think is a benefit to getting a master's in data science to transition career into data engineering, or would you recommend a different route?
So it depends on the type of job you want to do. If you're going for something more heavier on the ML side that requires you to build models and such, maybe. But even then, if you're in like the engineering side of things, I don't think a master's is necessary. As long as you have like some sort of technical background, I would say like the most important thing is to kind of getting the interviews and then cracking the interviews. Getting the interviews, I'd go for like referrals, things like that, than just like applying, because applying, it's really difficult to get through the automated screening. And then cracking the interview is like all about lead code and system design. So standard computer science stuff, computer or software engineering approach is what I would take. I don't think a master's is absolutely necessary now.
Yeah, I think that's like if you're going for the engineering route, it's like the benefit. It's like you don't need a master's.
Yeah.
It's you can generally get into it with. I mean, my background was in information systems, so as long as you can pass the interview, that's usually the key. It's like, can you answer the data structure and algorithm questions? Can you
SQL?
I was about to
no
say,
yard lines.
Yes,
Windows.
Can you be able to write SQL? Because that's usually, I think, whenever I've done interviews and I've interviewed someone that's more of a SWE kind of profile, they usually like they'll do great on the coding side, and then you'll throw them like some basic analytics questions, and it's usually a little more of a struggle.
I've seen the same now that you mentioned it. Like people, especially the engineers who are moving into data, they do really well on the coding side. Like they can crack it like linked list, whatever. But when you ask something complex like window function, they have a tough time.
Yeah, it's just a different mindset. Like it's not like obviously both people are smart. It's just like it's a different way of approaching and looking at data. So I always say it's like, engineers think about data in very like single transaction kind of mentality, and then data people tend to think about it as like rows and data sets, and then like molding those data sets together. And it's just a different abstraction. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, I always feel interesting there because it's like, there's so many certificates and so many master's degrees, but I'm always like, those won't necessarily get you the job, right? Like you said, like getting a referral, that's helpful. If you can get a job, even if it's at like a startup doing some of the data engineering style work, or starting from a data analyst position and then moving in, will probably be more effective, and you're going to learn more personally than going into like a master's of data science, unless you want to go the DS route.
Yeah, master's is only, in my opinion, only needed when you want to do like really kind of involved mathematical modeling or such. If you want to go into engineering, as it's been mentioned, just get your foot in some company, startup or whatever, few years, 1 or 2. I'm pretty sure in 2 years you'll be like, you could get a lot of LinkedIn outreach. So you'll have your pick.
Yeah. I think once you pass that like 2 or 3 years, especially if you're at the right companies, you'll start getting pinged by Amazon. Would you like to join? And you're like, maybe.
No.
I think doing Amazon's interview is always good for anyone, at the very least for practice. It's like, look, at the very least, it's great practice. If you don't make it, fine. It's great practice. You'll realize everything you don't know. Because I think the first time I interviewed at Amazon was like maybe a year and a half into my whole career, and they asked me about something about SLAs, and I was like, a what? Like the company I worked at didn't use SLAs. So I was like, what? I felt so like that one interview already showed me like how little I knew. I was like, oh, I don't know a lot. I have a lot more to grow. All right. So there's a lot of things we take for granted now.
Yeah, same with me though. In my during my first interview, they asked me this question. I was like, "Oh no, how SQL, right?" I didn't know how to do it, and then later I realized it was a window function. So,
well, see, the thing is, if you would have answered with the window function, because I definitely have with one of their interviews, what they do, and Facebook does the same thing, is like, how can you do it without a window function?
Yeah, that's a standard trick, I guess, these days.
Yeah. It was to do like a rolling aggregate sum. So you got to do a self join on the date, and then like kind of say any date, smaller than the date we're grouping on, some of those dates, which is like, okay. Any must read books for data engineering?
So if you want to kind of know about like the internal workings of encoding and locking in your databases, and I mentioned encoding, things like that, you want to look at designing data intensive applications. It is pretty dense. It's not an easy read. At least for me, it wasn't. It's really dense. But just going through it once and then knowing where to check certain things helps a lot. And the second thing I would say is Data Warehouse Toolkit. That is like, more people should read it, honestly. Just go through the first 3. You will know like what facts and dimensions are. And whenever you're like designing or modeling some table, just refer to it. Super, super helpful. Very still applicable. A lot of it's still applicable. You will know when you kind of read through it what still applies and what doesn't. So those 2 are absolute must reads, I think. Yeah.
If you can answer this, does LinkedIn use kind of a standard dimension fact approach?
Yeah. We have like fact tables. We have like dimension tables, snapshot dimensions. So we just like have snapshot every n hours. It makes it easy. You don't want to do like incremental, which makes it a little bit more. And also like, one more thing. Also like, sorry, I'm part of one team. There are other teams. They might use their own approaches. Sorry, you were saying.
Oh no, I was gonna ask, like, so because like at Facebook, sometimes we would just, instead of sometimes doing like slowly changing dimensions, it would just be, I think, like what you're describing, which is like, today this is what it was.
Yep.
Tomorrow this, but you just have the different partitions, so you could just be like, okay, join yesterday's data to yesterday's data. So is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, that's exactly the approach. Like we have date-based partitions, so like each day you have like the entire data set being processed. Also, the data is not that large for the specific project, so it makes it easy.
Yeah.
I have worked with SED, like slowly changing dimension type 2 usually at my previous job, mostly using DBT,
Yeah.
but it's a little bit more trickier to maintain. So
Yeah, it's trickier to maintain. It's harder for analysts to work with, but it saves a lot of space, right? Like that's the thing. It's like, okay, I feel like these companies can do it because they're like, what is space? Like I don't mind, and I guess
they
storage is
don't
cheap
care.
everywhere, but like even more so for a company like Facebook or LinkedIn, where it's like, what is data storage? We don't mind.
Yeah.
But you realize the reason they probably did it in the past was like it saves a ton of space. Like,
And it also like makes if you have like slowly changing dimensions for advanced use cases, it makes like seeing the historical changes much more easier.
yeah,
But what I realized is like when engineers think about like complex end use cases, it's not always the case. People don't really do like, oh, I want this point in time, I'm gonna join it. They just look at the latest data, so
yeah.
it's better to keep it pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I was curious about data modeling because it's like, a lot of people like to talk about like, oh, well, we have to do either modernize data modeling or something of that nature. But I
Sorry,
feel like
what?
everywhere, like I feel like there's a lot of discussions of like, next level modeling or thinking about what, Google loves to talk about one big table,
Mm,
um,
mm,
which I think some people still kind of do that. Like at Facebook, we would have like our what we call plus tables, which were just like we took the entities and then joined them all together, and then
right.
the analyst can look at that. But it was never like the goal wasn't that table. Our goal was like let's build the building blocks, and then we can build this next
Yeah.
layer for analysts to work with.
Yeah, just as you said, the building blocks, facts and dimensions, I haven't seen anything better, to be honest. People talk about activity schema or data vault, but everything starts with facts and dimensions. And on top of that, you can build all these data vaults or data mods or one big table, whatever you need. But facts and dimensions have to be like precise and accurate.
Yeah. Well, we kind of like slow down on questions. I don't know. Do you have any other final thoughts before I kind of let you go for the day?
Yeah, so like for people watching, go try out DuckDB. I mean, I'm not sponsored or anything. I'm just saying, just wanted to let you know. I really enjoyed it. Just think of the ways it might make your life easier. Like again with development, deployment, maybe in production as well. And I think there are like a lot of these tools, right? Like there's like DuckDB and there's this what is it, real data. I think
Oh
there's
yeah.
like a visualization tool specifically built on Druid, but locally it runs with DuckDB. Super easy to work with. You don't really need to query. You can just kind of click on it and see the ranges and see the distribution and such. So it makes working with DuckDB much more easier. So just play around with it, see if it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen, I think Real, and then the other one that, I mean, it's not the same, but I think it's Apache Arrow is the other one that I've been seeing a lot recently.
Apache what?
I think it's Apache Arrow, right? Am I looking?
Hole?
Arrow.
Arrow. Oh yeah, arrows. Yeah, I see. I see. Yeah, that's the data storage format, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, here one more question. Any recommendations for DuckDB tutorials? Is anyone doing them? If not, you should be doing them.
I don't know how. So DuckDB is just a SQL database, so I don't think you really need any separate tutorial other than just going through like the standard SQL stuff. So like your standard select group, joins, windows. But the good thing about DuckDB is they have something called extensions where you can like directly query data from S3, and then you can directly query data from Parquet without actually having to define the schema. So that might be helpful, but specifically for DuckDB tutorials, I would say it's just like SQL. You just use, if you know SQL, you already know DuckDB.
And it doesn't take much to set up. Like it's just like pip install.
No, so if you're doing in a CLI, you just download a script and just say /DuckDB. It's just a process. If you're using it in Python, it's pip install, and you can directly start writing SQL query within your Python script.
Nice. All right, that's cool. Okay, one more question, guys, and then we'll kind of call this off. Do you have any books for streaming? Any thoughts?
There was a Flink. The name escapes me. There was a Flink streaming book.
Let me see if I can find something
on Amazon. I think it's data streaming with Flink. Let me quickly check.
Yeah, I was like, let's see if we. Is it the one with the squirrel?
Yeah, that's the one.
Stream processing with Flink, with Apache Flink.
Yeah.
Who's it written by? Fabian
Oh yeah, I think that's the one. Yep.
Huske. I might be saying his last name wrong. I apologize. And
Yeah, the
Vasily.
Fabian one. That
Yeah,
one
yeah.
was really helpful.
Okay, the one with the squirrel, guys. The one with the
The one
squirrel.
with the squirrel. Yeah. Sorry, I don't remember the name. Yeah, because it goes over like how to handle like later events and how to handle like failed events and how do you reprocess it, things of that nature. So it was really nice.
Yeah, perfect. I'm gonna just actually, I put your link down in the description, but also anyone who's watching now in the chat, I just put Joseph's startdataengineering.com. You guys can go check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your time here. If you have no more questions or thoughts, I can hit end live, but let me know. Anything else before I hit end live?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
This was
thank
fun.
you. Thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for listening to us talk, and I'm gonna hit end broadcast.
Thanks everyone.